Let's say our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotov, v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who blessed us with your commandments and commanded us to immerse ourselves in the words of the Torah. Adonai our God, please make pleasant the words of your Torah in our mouths and in the mouths of your people, Israel, and all those grafted into the tree of Israel. And may we and our descendants and the descendants of your people, the house of Israel, all be perceivers of your name and students of your Torah for its own sake. Blessed are you, Adonai, who teaches Torah to his people, Yisrael. Vayakhel. And Moses convoked or called together, or gathered. To the end. In many years, this Torah portion, Vayakhel, is paired with Pekudei, the one, but not this year. This year it's separate. So, as we were talking about, good question that you brought up earlier, yeah, we've been seeing this repetition. And you'd have to go all the way back to Terumah and kind of see the example of it that Truma correctly, but we always say Terumah. Starts out, Vayedaber Adonai al Moshe lemor. So the Lord spoke to Moses saying, tell the Israelites to bring me Terumah, to bring me gifts. And Vayakhel then is Moses back with the people after he convoked them and said, Eye hadeberim asher ziva Adonai la'asot otam. These are the things that the Lord has commanded you to do. So it's actually kind of a precursor of what all of Deuteronomy is going to be about, because throughout Exodus and the others, there's a whole lot of, and the Lord spoke to Moses saying, but then when we get to Deuteronomy, it's, and Moses said to the people, he's teaching it. So this is Moses transmitting what God had commanded, and then immediately the workers putting it together. But do note that the very first thing that Moses tells them, these are the things the Lord has commanded you. On 6 days, work may be done, but on the 7th day, you have a Sabbath of complete rest. This one interpretation of this is that he was reminding them, even though we're about to build the house of God, that doesn't override the Sabbath. In the period of construction, we are still going to take the Sabbath. You still have to keep the Sabbath, even though you're doing this fantastic thing of building a dwelling place for God. But another way of looking at that is whenever it says on 6 days you may work, but on the 7th day you shall have a Sabbath of complete rest. What is that taking us back to? Creation. The 6 days of creation and the 7th day of rest. And so in the big scope, big picture here, then the days of creation where God made man a place to live, and then here is man in God's image creating a place for God to dwell among them. So there's a direct parallel. These are the two creation narratives, if you will. The creation of the world, the universe, and all we know, the creation of the dwelling place of God on earth. It's actually kind of mind-boggling to consider. This is the beauty of it.
Creating a people to dwell in. Last night, the Sabbath is called the bride.
Right. Come, my beloved, and welcome the bride. Lecha Dodi is the song we sing.
I read Proverbs 31 to read it every Sabbath, and if you read that, if you study that, It's talking about all the elements.
All the elements of what's being constructed here. That's a beautiful parallel. And so what does that do then? That brings the marriage picture into this. And so this could be looked on as the bridal chamber in a way. This is, and later on through the prophets, through Jeremiah, God is going to speak about this time in the wilderness with his bride. When you were a young bride, I found you wallowing in your blood, but I took you out of that. And so there's a whole lot more to this than just this repetitive, and he put rings in poles, and they made gratings, and they cast it with this and that and the other. We can get lost in the details and not see the bigger picture that God originally, from the very beginning, Bereshit, right? He had to create a space within himself. He had to empty himself in order to create a place for the universe to exist. That's a mystical interpretation by Judaism. It's called Tzimtzum, the emptying out, so that there can be a place for creation to happen. And now here is man created in the image and likeness of God, and out in this vast barren space. And what are they doing? They're creating this tent, like this space inside. Again, it's a place of holiness. It has chambers. We have the desert, the desolate desert, and the first thing you would encounter is this fence out there. And that's the precincts of the temple area. And then the next thing that you would do is step into this tent, which is sitting there in the first chamber, has the menorah and the table of the incense altar, and then that unique table that the King James Version had to create and invent an English word to describe the shewbread. It's a really big shoe, I don't know, but it's a much more fascinating actual Hebrew there that says the bread of panim lefanai tamid, panim lefanai tamid, of faces to my face continuously. So what do we do at a table? We dine at a table. A family dines at a table. And we sit around the table and our faces are face to face. So the shulchan, the bread of the presence, then, is this imagery for each of the 12 tribes has a place at the table. Each of them has a loaf at the table. It's set, and it is faces to face. The light in this chamber, in this antechamber, comes from this beautiful menorah, which would have been, would have stood about the size of that brass one sitting there, but it would be 66 pounds of solid gold, and these cups facing forward, casting their light into the room. And then against the curtain into the holiest place then is this incense altar, where this specific mix of incense was brought and tossed on there. And the Talmud records that there was one family that by the time of the temple, they really had the ability to make this fantastically perfect incense, because they said when the priest would throw it on the fire, it would pop into the air like a great mushroom-shaped cloud and screen the whole thing. And so this family had this down. Interestingly enough, where their workshop was to do that was an upper room of the of where the incense was made. There's no way to prove it, but it is a remarkable, interesting idea that This is in Jerusalem, and it was in an upper room. There was a great deal of controversy, but rivalry and things like that for the various Levite families that had the responsibilities of all these things. And the Talmud seems to record that there was this one family that really knew how to make the incense, and there were a lot of other rival families that wanted to be able to do that, but they couldn't. Anyway, I just bring that up to kind of make that connection. But where we're talking about now is in this antechamber, and then the following chamber right behind that is the Holy of Holies. So this antechamber is the holy place, and then that's the Holy of Holies. So you've got the temple precinct outside, you've got the holy place, and then you've got God's mercy seat. And that only gets visited one time per year by the high priest. But look at what has to happen. So all of the people can come as far as the gate, and then with proper preparation, they can come inside the precinct in order to be able to bring their offerings or whatever it might be. But they don't get past the altar, the outside altar. They don't, the people of Israel don't get to go into the tent itself. It's only the priests. There are the priests then, that the very special ones that have the responsibility to light the lamps and to set the bread of faces to my face. And then only one time a year, only the high priest can go all the way in, and he takes blood with him. And this is what Hebrews is all about, talking about the comparison of this and Yeshua being the high priest that enters into the Holy of Holies in heaven, which this is just a pattern of. But even this pattern says that. So again, and I won't really go into this, but in Hasidic thought, there are worlds. There are these four worlds, if you will, each with a higher level of sanctity. And the world that we live in would be the equivalent of the temple precinct. And the world that the Ruach HaKodesh, the Spirit, dominates, if you will, I guess that's a bad way to put it, but maybe, would be the holy place. So in the big picture of what Yeshua is offering us, what is the good news of Yeshua? Well, the good news of Yeshua is to take us from a state of people who essentially can be into the temple precincts to being guided by the Spirit, which dwells in that holy place. Not the Holy of Holies, but the holy place. When Hasidic thinkers and Kabbalists read John, the book of John, they're often struck by how mystical it is. And the book of Revelation, of course, too, extremely mystical with all this sort of thing. So they find it just rife with mystical interpretation. But it's here for us because Yeshua brings that to us. And it really doesn't need to be all that out of reach for us. It is simply that if we want to keep in our mind's eye this tabernacle in the wilderness and understand what Yeshua has done for us, is given us a path into the holy place through his own blood, which no priest could do. They would just have to keep bringing that year after year.
What was in the Holy of Holies?
That's so this ark, the ark, and the tablets. In the course of reading, we're going to find out that they also put a jar of the manna in there. They also put Aaron's budding rod in there. By the time of the temple, all that's in there are supposedly the tablets. A lot of controversy about that. When the Philistines got a hold of it in the time of Samuel, did they take all that stuff?
No, it got hold of the Philistines.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, they had to leave a very painful offering. Anyway, all right, where are we? So we're looking at this. But in all of this wonderful splendor, the other part of this that I think always strikes me is, you know, you hear these fantastic curtains being made, and they're embroidered, and there's silver and gold and everything, except one thing is missing. There's no floor at all. There's no floor. It doesn't, you know, assign some bunch of weavers to make carpets or planks for the floor. It sits right on the desert dirt. It is this heavenly place sitting right on the desert dirt. And I think even that has itself a huge picture. This is where heaven comes to earth. The earth is God's footstool. And so here is this fantastic thing sitting on the dust of the earth, the dust from which we were made. And so if this is a picture of Yeshua, then he's a picture of the second Adam, the perfect man. He is a body which is from the dust of the earth, but he is the intersection of the dust of the earth and the heavenly realm. Right with us.
That the sockets are silver, because it represents the Messiah, and Paul even alludes to that in Ephesians 2, where he talks about the cornerstone.
The cornerstone.
When they're setting up
This foundation.
that one silver socket is laid, and then the lines.
Everything else comes off of that, yeah. And how are those made? Again, they were made by the half shekel each, so every Israelite had a share in that foundation, which then brings this mystical connection of Messiah to every person. So if he is a picture of that, then we are one in him, right? Absolutely, yes.
This is going from the sublime to the very mundane.
Yeah,
How
which
does
is
it even carry all those heavy-
right. And that's very interesting. So they did have carts. They did have carts for it, but the ark itself had a very specific, that had to be carried on the shoulders. And we'll see a huge violation of that in the book of Samuel. David desperately wants to bring the ark to Jerusalem, so he sets it all up to do so. And instead of looking for the descendants of the proper priestly family to do it, he gets an ox cart and puts it on it. And they're going along, and the ox cart is rickety and rackety, and Uzziah, who's running the ox cart, thinks the thing's about to tip over, and he puts his hand out to stop it, and he's dead. And all of a sudden, this joyous procession comes to this tragic conclusion, and David's in tears. They happen to be very near to the house of an appropriate priest, appropriate Levitical priest who can take it, and the ark goes into his house for 3 months. And it says in Samuel, it says, and he was blessed greatly, very blessed, the presence of God in his home. But then David realizes what he did. He didn't follow the commands. So then he gets the proper ones to come and put the poles in, and then they bring it properly. And that's when he's dancing in front of it, and every 6 steps, yeah. So, so yeah, that's how they did it. And they had to be strong, you know, to carry all that weight of gold and all that for all those miles in the hot desert. Oh my gosh.
Some of the sages talk about it carrying them.
Yeah, right. Like hovercraft, sort of. Yeah. But then think about the detail, because we'll get into that detail in Numbers about the responsibility when it's time to break camp. Then everyone has this detailed responsibility. You're in charge of the silver hooks. You're in charge of the gold hooks, etc. So they, you know, you can picture it. I've seen fire camps get thrown up really fast when everyone has, you know, and we go from barren desert land to all of a sudden we've got a mess tent and tents to sleep in, and the comms tent and the shower tent, and, you know, all of those kind of things can go up in a day. So with that many hands, of course, they could do it, and then
It's like
moving
a
on.
ship, you have an action station.
Yep.
So everyone knows where they're supposed to be
At a-
Yeah, exactly. Giant quarters.
And that's why I think there is so much of a military theme in these texts. Is the people moved like a military machine, almost, if you will. All right, so that got us on a lot of different talks, which is really good. But again, from these esoteric things to the mundane of how do we actually do that? But that is the point in and of itself, isn't it? Because then the service of the temple is day to day. And once again, the lesson is the intersection of the heavenly with the world that we live in, with our day-to-day lives. And then this is Hebrews, but there other people have added the 2 Corinthians and 1 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians talks about being a generous giver, but 1 Corinthians chapter 3, 11 through 18 really talks about us being the temple of God. And so once again, the really good news of Messiah Yeshua is this indwelling of the Holy Spirit to guide us in our day-to-day lives, to give us the ability to turn mundane things into actually blessed things through our actions, through blessing everything that we do, through looking at the world through the eyes of the Torah. Let them be like frontlets between your eyes. In other words, you look out through the hairs and you see the world through that. This is what Messiah Yeshua has brought to us, the ability to transcend the ordinary while living in the ordinary. And I think that's a huge thing.
Paul says, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Paul also says that we're all given our individual tasks or
Mhm.
roles for administration, for preaching, for teaching, and all of the rest. And
All works
it
together
all works together so that the body of believers all work together.
in the one thing. So yeah, so this whole thing of the tabernacle and its movements and its functioning and everything is then a picture of how we are to live as a community, as the kahal. And that's what this Torah portion, thank you for that, because that's what this Torah portion starts off. Vayakhel, and he gathered. That's from that word kahal, the assembly, the gathering, the group of Israel. The church. that's how it gets translated very often. Okay. Yes, please.
So, in the temple, when the temple was built, there was the service area and then the Holy of Holies.
Mm-hmm.
And then when Jesus was crucified, the
The curtain
of the
torn.
temple tore from the top to the bottom. And
Good question.
speak to that.
Yeah, well, I interpret that since what was first there was the curtain into the anteroom. So what was in the anteroom, and by the time of the second temple, there was a lot more than just the one menorah. At least for Solomon's temple, the first temple, he had the menorah, but then he also, that room was large, and so he had 10 more smaller menorahs made. So the whole thing was full of light. It was flooded with light. The lighting in there was much better than the wilderness tabernacle. So if you're out there, a giant earthquake comes, there's darkness over the land, and the temple curtain, which we can talk about that too, that's a phenomenal thing, tore, then all of a sudden you see this light shining out. It wasn't, I don't see any evidence from the text, let me put it that way. I don't see evidence from the text that it was the curtain going into the Holy of Holies where the ark was. I see only evidence in the text that it's this first curtain into the holy place.
Elements of Messiah.
They're right there.
And some say that him on the cross,
He could visually see into it
See.
from where he was. That's a possibility. So the light came flooding out, and that also means that the incense would be smelled coming out. The prayers would be coming out. So there's the access that we have. As to that curtain, the Talmud records that it was a huge curtain, and they replaced it. I don't know if it was annually or biannually, because it would get blood splattered on it. It was woven to a thickness of a hand's breadth, and they had dozens of maidens from Israel continuously throughout the year working on weaving this, and so it's massive work, a hand breadth, and you've seen the second temple, Herod's temple, was incredibly tall. So it would have taken machinery, it would have taken lifts and everything to be able to just lift this massive thing into place. And in an earthquake, it tears. Those guys that go tear phone books, try tearing a woven thing. Yeah.
They keep the lamps lit 24/7.
What they say was they're supposed to go in at just before sundown to light them, but what occurs, what the Talmud records, was that for all recorded time except for one period, which is very important, the seventh lamp on the westernmost one, the one that was closest to the Holy of Holies, was always still lit by the time they came in to replace the oil and relight it for the night. So that pertained. And the other thing that pertained was at Yom Kippur, when they would throw the scapegoat, the so-called scapegoat, off the cliff, and he had that crimson wool tied around his horns, and then the other crimson wool was hung on the doors of the temple. When God accepted the offering, that would turn white as snow. But the Talmud records, for 40 years prior to the destruction of the temple, it didn't happen, and the last lamp was out. It went out. It wasn't lit when they came in to do it. So when was the temple destroyed? 70 AD. What year is 40 years before that? 30. When was Yeshua crucified? 30. And so, and that same section of the Talmud says, because there were doors and there was a curtain. So if you opened the doors, the curtain was visible. It said that the doors kept opening on their own. They couldn't keep the doors closed for the 40 years following Yeshua's crucifixion, death, and resurrection. And that doesn't come from this. That comes from the Talmud.
So the curtain into the Holy of Holies
Remains.
is still there. Is what you're
I would.
saying.
I see no evidence to say, because it's singular. It says the curtain was torn. It didn't say curtains. So I find that compelling evidence that it would be just that outer one, because what we're looking forward to is that. Revelation has the heavenly tabernacle coming to earth and resting on these sapphire foundations and everything.
The other issue is for Orthodox Jews, when someone dies close to them, they tear their garment. And this is a garment of the Father, who tore it, then we could see that. If it was the inner garment, the inner curtain, we wouldn't be able to see that. But everyone in the temple
Could see the light that came out, yeah. So, all right, and then this would be, of course, Shabbat Parah. There are 5 special Shabbats. Shabbaton, sorry. in the lead up to Passover. And we've already had Shabbat Shekalim. We talked about that. And that's a beautiful picture of giving of the shekel and becoming the foundational bases of the boards in the tabernacle. Shabbat Zachor before Purim, where we remember what Amalek did to us. And so that we wipe out, Amalek. Very good. Agag. Ugh. This one would be Shabbat Parah. And this is the one that reads about the red heifer. What a puzzling thing the red heifer is, a paradoxical thing in that its ashes meant to purify people who had become unclean for reason of being near or touching a corpse. But in the preparation of the ash, all those associated with the preparation of the ash, which will clean everyone, all those associated with the slaughtering and all become unclean for a week in doing it. It's a tremendous paradox. This thing meant to be a purifying agent, being involved in the death of the red heifer makes one unclean for a time, but only for a time. Then the next one that we're going to have is Shabbat HaChodesh, the Sabbath about the month. And that's because in Exodus 12, the first thing God did was change the Israelites' calendar. This will be the beginning of months. So we remember that on Shabbat HaKodesh. And then finally, Shabbat HaGadol, the great Sabbath, the Sabbath preceding Pesach. And that remembers the time when the Paschal Lamb was selected. So the Talmud records that Pesach in that year, in the year of the Exodus, occurred on Thursday. Therefore, the 10th of Nisan occurred on the Sabbath of that year. So they were taking the lamb in to select it and inspect it on the 10th of Nisan. That also, for us New Testament fans, that's the date that Yeshua rides into the temple area on the donkey. So the Passover lamb coming, and he's the gospel, the Gospels record then him being inspected, he's tested, he's questioned, he's engaged with the priests of the temple for those 4 days before it.
When he's riding on that donkey, everyone recognizes that and says, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai.
Blessed is the one who comes in the name of the Lord. There's a midrash on Psalm 118 that would have been known in those days, and it talks about when the Messiah comes. They picture him traveling from the Mount of Olives, the temple, with a huge procession behind him and great joy and cheering. And there's a group of people in the temple, and there's a group of people with him, and the ones in the temple shout out, Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. So the rabbis had commanded that if you happen to be lucky enough to be there when Messiah comes, this is what you say. You say Baruch haba b'shem Adonai. And sure enough, all of those thousands of people were doing that. So again, another one of those beautiful connections between the Midrash and the Gospels that you can see. And I think that's probably about all we have for today. We covered a lot.
So when the temple was destroyed,
Mm-hmm.
what was destroyed in it, and what were they able to get?
Yeah. Again, nothing known for certain, but some say that they got the ark out through the tunnels, but the menorah they did not get out, because we have that depiction on the Arch of Titus in Rome that shows the Romans got away with the menorah and the table of the showbread, so that table and those two trumpets, and they kind of stuck them in the table. That's how that Arch of Titus kind of shows us that. There is a big movement today, and apparently there's some openness in the Vatican to it, although not much, because they'd have to admit an awful lot, to return whatever they have in the storehouses of the Vatican, in the basements. And there's apocryphal tales of Jewish men being allowed into those, and a door was cracked open and they saw the menorah. We don't know if that's true or not, but
Was the ark radioactive? I mean, is that why somebody who would touch it?
I don't know about radioactive, but God's glory. God's glory is not something that impure humans can be in touch with. I don't ever try to make it. I guess the only way to describe it is one of my professors says, we live around with wall sockets everywhere. And there's enough power in those to kill every one of us. And so we have very specific ways that we can approach that deadly power that's in there. We have plugs that are insulated. We have to hold them a certain way. If an electrician is going to work on them, we've got to discharge it. We've got to turn the power off. There's one right there. He's lived this far long, so he apparently he knows the Torah of approaching electricity, and he's very Torah observant because he's alive to speak of it. In that way, then, the commands for how we approach the ark are a parallel to that. And so when Uzziah just reached out and touched it, boom, he was done, because it apparently had the full glory of God attached to it. So we shall see. Hopefully we'll see in our lifetime. That would be wonderful. Let's go to the Lord in prayer. Blessed Lord our God, we thank you for this time discussing your beautiful tabernacle, puzzling to us, and yet the more we dig in, the more beauty we see in it. Lord, help us then to approach you with the same diligence and with the same wonder. Help us to display the light that is within the holy place through our actions in the world. You have given us the Holy Spirit through the work of Yeshua, that we might then ourselves be little tabernacles here on earth. Help us then to provide the service to our fellow man that the tabernacle has done. Help us, Lord, to be forgiving and to be loving, and to help people find a pure path. And I pray this all, B'Shem Yeshua. Amen.